The hotel manager told me not to use the service elevator after midnight. At the time, I thought he was joking. It was my first night working there, and every older employee I'd met so far had the same exhausted sense of humor. The kind where they'd say something completely insane with a straight face just to see how long it took the new person to react. So when he handed me the brass utility keys and said, "If the service elevator opens on 13, don't get in," I laughed a little. He didn't. That should have been my first warning. The hotel itself sat just outside downtown near the riverfront. It was one of those old buildings that had clearly been renovated 100 times over several decades. Half modern boutique hotel, half place where you could absolutely imagine someone getting murdered in 1978. The lobby looked nice enough during the daytime. Marble floors, fancy hanging lights. Fake plants are trying their best to look expensive. But overnight, the entire building changed personality. The lights dimmed automatically around midnight, leaving long sections of hallway in this soft yellow darkness that somehow made everything feel older. The music in the lobby shut off. The restaurant closed. Most guests disappeared into their rooms. After about 1 a.m., the place stopped feeling like a hotel. It felt like a giant empty maze pretending to be one. I worked overnight maintenance, which mostly meant handling noise complaints, bringing towels to rooms, unclogging toilets, and occasionally dealing with drunk people making terrible life decisions. Honestly, the job sounded easy enough. And for the first few weeks, it mostly was. The overnight crew only consisted of 4 people total. There was me, a front desk girl named Vanessa who constantly drank energy drinks and watched crime documentaries at the reception computer. Luis, the overnight security guard who was about 60 years old and walked so slowly you'd think time itself was tiring him out. And Martin, the hotel manager, who looked permanently stressed in a way that made me think he probably hadn't slept properly since the early 2000s. Martin was the one who gave me the elevator warning. He said it casually while showing me around the basement utility halls. The guest elevators shut down one at a time overnight for maintenance rotation, he explained. But the service elevator runs 24/7. Then he paused outside the metal doors. If it opens on 13, don't use it. I smiled awkwardly. What's on 13? There is no 13. Then he walked away. The hotel officially only had 12 floors, at least publicly. The elevator buttons skip directly from 12 to the rooftop access level marked R. Pretty normal, honestly. Lots of buildings skip 13 because people are weirdly superstitious about it. But the thing was, the service elevator panel still had a faint outline where a 13 button used to exist. You could only notice it under certain lighting, like someone had removed it years ago. I remember staring at it during one of my first shifts while hauling clean sheets upstairs. The metal around the missing button looked scratched. Not old scratches either. Fresh ones. Like people still messed with it sometimes. The weird stuff started small. That's always how these stories go. Not with ghosts flying across hallways or doors slamming shut. Just little things that slowly make your stomach feel wrong. One night, around 2 a.m., I got a complaint from room 814 about knocking sounds inside the walls. The guest was annoyed but calm about it, assuming it was plumbing or construction. There wasn't any construction happening. Still, I apologized and went upstairs to check. The 8th floor hallway was dead quiet when I stepped out of the elevator. That soft hotel silence where the carpet absorbs almost every sound. I walked toward room 814, expecting nothing. Then I heard it too. Knock, knock, knock. It came from somewhere farther down the hallway. Not inside the walls. A door. Someone was knocking softly on one of the guest room doors. I waited a second, expecting someone to answer. Nobody did. Then the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm. Slow, patient. I followed the sound farther down the hall until I realized it was coming from room 828. The hallway felt colder over there for some reason. I stood outside the room listening. Nothing. No TV. No movement. No voices. Then from inside the room, knock, knock, knock. I physically jumped. The sound had come from the other side of the door, like someone inside the room was knocking outward. I checked the room number again. Vacant. No guest assigned. At this point, I was mostly just annoyed because I assumed some drunk idiot had wandered into an empty room somehow. I knocked normally. Hotel maintenance. No answer, but I heard movement inside. Very slow footsteps crossing the carpet. Then silence. I used my master key and opened the door. The room was empty. Empty. No lagi. No person. Nothing unusual at all. The bathroom light was off. Bed untouched. Curtains closed. And yet the room still felt occupied somehow. Like someone had literally just stepped out seconds before I entered. I checked everything quickly before leaving. Then, just as I reached the hallway, knock, knock, knock. This time it came from farther down the floor. Another room. I didn't tell anybody about that, mostly because it sounded ridiculous. But weirdly enough, after that night, I started noticing the knocking more often. Always after midnight. Always on different floors. And always in that same rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Sometimes guests complain about it too. Usually, they described it as housekeeping accidentally waking them up. Except that housekeeping never worked overnight. Vanessa eventually noticed me reacting to it one night while we sat in the lobby. "Oh," she said casually, "you're hearing the doors now." The doors. She nodded while drinking an aggressively neon blue energy drink. "Don't follow it. You stay here." Why does everybody say stuff like that here? She laughed. "You'll see." Not reassuring. At all. About a month into the job, I started getting comfortable enough to explore parts of the hotel I normally ignored. There were old banquet halls in the basement that nobody used anymore. Storage rooms filled with broken furniture. Long maintenance corridors behind the walls. The building was much bigger than guests realized. One night around 3:30 a.m., I was replacing light bulbs near the laundry area when I noticed a hallway I hadn't seen before. It sat behind an unmarked gray door near the service elevator. The hallway beyond was narrow and dimly lit with old wallpaper peeling off the walls. At the very end sat another elevator door, older than the others, manual gate style. I genuinely thought it had been abandoned. Then the floor indicator above it lit up. 12, 13, 14. The elevator was moving. I stood there confused for a second because nobody should have been using it. The old elevator finally stopped. The number above the door flickered strangely, then changed. 13. My stomach tightened immediately. The gate slowly rattled open. Inside the elevator stood a woman facing the back wall, completely motionless. Long dark hair, hotel bathrobe, bare feet. At first, I assumed she was a guest somehow. Then she tilted her head slightly. Not enough to look at me. Just enough that I could see part of her face reflected faintly in the metal wall. Her mouth was hanging open, way too wide, like her jaw physically couldn't close properly. I backed up immediately. The woman still didn't turn around. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "Are you getting on?" Every hair on my arm stood up, because her voice sounded wrong. Not distorted exactly, more like several voices trying to speak at once quietly underneath hers. I stepped backward again. The elevator gate suddenly slammed shut hard enough to make me jump. Then the elevator began moving upward, past 13. The floor indicator changed to numbers that shouldn't have existed. 14, 15, 16, before abruptly going dark. I didn't sleep at all the next day. I kept replaying the woman's voice in my head, the way she never turned around, the impossible floor numbers. Part of me tried rationalizing it. Maybe the indicator malfunctioned. Maybe there really was a hidden maintenance floor. Maybe I was exhausted. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations actually fit. That night, I asked Luis about the old elevator. The second I mentioned it, he stopped walking. "You saw it." I immediately noticed he didn't ask what I saw. Just as I saw it. Who was the woman? Luis looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "I don't know. That elevator goes somewhere." After a long silence, he finally answered. "Years ago, before renovations, there was another floor." "What happened to it?" He rubbed his face slowly. "Fire." Apparently, Sometime in the late 80s, a fire broke out during a New Year's party held on the original 13th floor ballroom. According to Luis, the fire exits malfunctioned during the panic. Several people died. The hotel covered most of it up afterward because ownership changed shortly after. The entire floor was supposedly gutted and sealed during renovations years later, at least officially, but the floor is still there. I asked, Luis Chiragwikli. Depends who you ask. That answer irritated me more than it scared me. Nobody in this building would just explain anything directly. Every conversation felt like the start of a campfire story. Before I could ask more, the service elevator dinged softly behind us. Both of us looked over instinctively. The doors slowly opened. Empty. Luis immediately walked away. I'm taking lunch. Seriously? He didn't even answer. Things escalated after that. Fast. The knocking started happening every single night now. Guests complained constantly. Some described hearing people walking outside their rooms for hours. Others claimed someone knocked softly at their doors before disappearing. One elderly woman checked out early after insisting a burned woman stood at the foot of her bed overnight, smiling at her. Management blamed stress and exhaustion. Typical hotel nonsense. The inn room 1106 called around 2:45 a.m. The guest sounded terrified. There's someone outside my room. I grabbed the radio immediately and headed upstairs. The hallway on 11 felt unusually warm when I stepped out. Almost humid. The guest cracked the door open when I arrived. A middle-aged businessman, shaking badly. He's still there, he whispered. Who? The man. I looked down the hallway. Nobody there. Then I noticed the smell. Smoke. Faint but unmistakable. The guest pointed farther down the hall. He was standing there staring at my door. Did he threaten you? The man swallowed hard. He didn't have eyes. I should have laughed that off. Instead, I felt genuinely nervous. Because deep down, I already believed him. I walked farther down the hallway slowly. The smoke smell got stronger. Then I saw him, standing near the ice machine at the far end. A man in a black suit. Completely motionless. His skin looked dark and cracked like burned paper. And where his eyes should have been. Nothing. Just black hollow sockets. He tilted his head slightly when he noticed me, then started walking toward me. Slowly. Not aggressive. Almost casually. But the way he moved felt wrong somehow. Like old footage missing frames. I backed away instinctively. The lights overhead flickered once. And suddenly he was closer. Much closer. Close enough now that I could smell something rotten beneath the smoke. Then every hotel room door along the hallway started knocking simultaneously. Knock, 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 over and over down the corridor. The burned man smiled, and all the hallway lights went out. I ran. I genuinely don't care how pathetic that sounds. I sprinted back toward the elevators while hearing those knocking sounds erupt behind me. Not random anymore. Rhythmic. Coordinated. Like hundreds of people trapped behind the doors. The elevator took forever. I kept glancing down the dark hallway, expecting to see that thing running at me. Instead, I saw silhouettes. People standing outside various guest rooms, motionless in the darkness. Some tall, some short, all burned, all smiling. The elevator finally opened. I practically fell inside, hammering the lobby button repeatedly. Just before the doors shut completely, a burned hand grabbed the edge. I screamed. Actually screamed. The hand held the doors open briefly while blackened fingers curled against the metal. Then from somewhere down the hallway, I heard that woman's voice again. Are you getting on? The hand immediately released. The doors shut. The elevator descended. And I stood there shaking uncontrollably the entire ride down. Vanessa took one look at me when I reached the lobby and said, "You saw them." I could barely speak. What the hell is happening here? She looked exhausted rather than surprised. They come back when renovations start. What? The hotel's expanding again. Every time construction starts, weird things happen. That sounded insane. But then she showed me something on her phone. Old newspaper archives. Several fires. Multiple deaths. disappearances over decades, most centered around the same section of the building, the original 13th floor. Apparently, the hotel had tried renovating that area several times over the years. Workers quit constantly. Some claimed they heard knocking inside sealed walls. Others saw people wandering the halls overnight. One maintenance worker disappeared entirely in 2004. The only thing found was his utility keyring inside the service elevator. At around 4 a.m., Martin finally arrived after Vanessa called him. For the first time since meeting him, he actually looked scared. Not annoyed, not tired, scared. When I described the burned man, Martin immediately asked, "Did he touch you?" No, he visibly relaxed. Then he quietly said something I'll never forget. They usually don't unless you answer. Answer what? I wanted to ask, but I already knew. The knocking, the elevator, the voices, all of it felt like invitations somehow. Open the door, get on the elevator, answer the phone. Tiny choices, tiny permissions. Martin eventually admitted the truth, or at least part of it. The original 13th floor had never actually been removed. It was sealed, still physically sitting between floors 12 and the rooftop access. The old service elevator sometimes still stopped there overnight, mostly between 3 and 5 a.m. And according to him, people who entered during those times occasionally disappeared. No explanation, no vodias, just gone. Naturally, I told him I was quitting immediately. He nodded like he expected that. Honestly, I think everybody eventually quits. Nobody stayed there long. Not overnight. Not once did Hayes started seeing things. My final shift happened 2 nights later. I only stayed because I needed the paycheck badly enough to make terrible decisions. Nothing unusual happened for most of the night. No knocking, no weird guests, no elevator activity. Honestly, it almost felt normal again. Then at 4:12 a.m., the service elevator dinged softly in the basement hallway. Every employee in the lobby froze simultaneously. We all heard it. Martin slowly stood up from the front desk. Don't go near it. Nobody planned to. But then the radio on my belt crackled. Static first, then a voice. My voice. Can somebody help me? Every ounce of blood drained from my body. The radio continued. I'm stuck up here. Martin looked horrified now, because he recognized my voice, too. Then, through the radio came knocking. Knock, 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 followed by screaming. The service elevator began ascending. Floor numbers are changing slowly overhead. 3, 4, 5. The entire hotel suddenly lost power. Darkness swallowed the lobby instantly. Guests started shouting upstairs. Emergency lights flickered on dimly a few seconds later. Then the elevator stopped. Floor 13. The doors opened, and standing inside was me, or something is wearing me. Same uniform, same face, but burned black, smiling impossibly wide. The thing tilted its head slightly, then spoke in my voice. Are you getting on? Nobody moved. The copy of me slowly stepped forward out of the elevator, and somewhere upstairs, every hotel room door began knocking at once. Story 2. The first strange thing about the apartment was that nobody ever used the laundry room after midnight. I noticed that during my first week living there because the building itself was huge. 6 floors, almost full, and mostly rented out by younger people because it sat right beside a college campus. During the daytime, the place was loud enough to drive you insane. Doors slamming constantly, music through walls, people yelling down the hallway as if they'd never discovered phones existed. The usual apartment experience. But every night after around midnight, the basement laundry room became completely abandoned. At first, I figured people just didn't want to do laundry that late, which honestly made sense. But after a while, I realized it was more than that, because even the people who stayed up all night avoided going down there. One of my neighbors literally left her wet clothes sitting inside a washing machine until the next morning instead of going back downstairs at 1 in the morning to switch them over. That felt weird to me. I'm not exactly fearless, but I also grew up with two younger brothers who treated every dark basement like a WWE arena. So creepy rooms stopped bothering me pretty early in life. Besides, I worked late shifts at a shipping warehouse and usually got home around midnight anyway. Doing laundry at weird hours was normal for me. The building itself wasn't even that old either. Maybe built in the early 2000s at the latest. It wasn't some ancient haunted place with a tragic history or anything like that. If anything, it was aggressively normal. Gray walls, cheap carpeting, long identical hallways that smelled faintly like cleaning chemicals and microwave noodles, depending on the day. The laundry room sat in the basement beside the storage lockers and maintenance office. There were 12 machines, total lined up against opposite walls with a row of plastic chairs in the middle. Fluorescent lights buzzed constantly overhead, and one of the dryers always made this horrible metallic squealing noise that sounded like someone slowly dragging a chair across concrete. Honestly, the room mostly just felt depressing until I started noticing the sounds. The first time happened around 12:30 at night while I was waiting for my clothes to dry. I sat there watching random videos on my phone when I heard another dryer running somewhere farther back in the room. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then I realized every machine except mine was off. I looked up from my phone and listened carefully. The sound definitely continued. A low mechanical tumbling noise mixed with faint scraping sounds every few seconds. I stood up and checked the machines one by one, thinking maybe I somehow missed one still running. Nothing. Every machine sat dark and silent, but the sound kept going. It sounded farther away now, like it wasn't coming from the laundry room anymore, more like somewhere behind the walls. I remember actually laughing a little to myself because I thought maybe I was losing my mind from exhaustion. Warehouse shifts destroyed my sleep schedule. Half the time, I felt like a zombie pretending to be a person anyway. Still, something about the sound bothered me enough that I packed up my clothes early and went upstairs. As I reached the basement stairwell door, I heard it again. Not the dryer. Knocking. 3 soft knocks from somewhere deep in the basement hallway behind me. I stopped walking immediately. The sound came again a few seconds later. Knock. Knock, knock. Very soft. Almost polite. I turned around, expecting to see another tenant. Nobody was there. Just the empty hallway leading toward the storage rooms. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, listening before finally muttering absolutely not to myself and going upstairs. At the time, it honestly felt more funny than scary. That changed pretty quickly. A few nights later, I got home from work around 1 in the morning, completely exhausted after helping unload inventory trucks during a thunderstorm. My back hurts. My shoes were soaked. I smelled vaguely like cardboard and diesel fuel. The glamorous working life. I threw my clothes into a laundry basket, planning to wait until morning, but then I realized I only had one clean work shirt left for the rest of the week. So despite every instinct telling me to go to sleep instead, I dragged myself downstairs. The basement felt colder than usual that night. Not freezing exactly, just damp. The kind of cold that seeps into old buildings during heavy rain. The laundry room lights flickered slightly when I walked in, and for some reason, every machine door was hanging open. Washers, dryers, every single one. I actually stood there for a second staring because it looked bizarre, like someone had gone through opening all of them one by one before leaving. I remember joking out loud to myself. Cool, basement goblin activity. Nobody answered, which, in hindsight, I'm very thankful for. I loaded my clothes into one of the washers and sat down scrolling through my phone while the machine filled with water. The room was completely silent except for the washer humming and the rain hitting those tiny basement windows near the ceiling. Then I heard somebody laughing, very quietly. It sounded distant. It came from farther down the basement near the storage lockers. At first, I figured another tenant had come downstairs. But the laugh sounded wrong somehow. Not happy. Not conversational, more like somebody trying not to laugh while hiding. That immediately made me uncomfortable. I looked toward the hallway outside the laundry room, but didn't see anybody. Then came a knocking again. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, this time closer, much closer. I tried ignoring it for about 5 minutes. Honestly, I really did. I told myself it was pipes or maintenance sounds or literally anything rational because I did not want to become one of those people freaking themselves out in a basement at 1 in the morning. But the sounds kept happening. Knocking, then silence, then faint scraping sounds, then another soft laugh. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Or stupidity. Probably both. I stepped out into the hallway and looked toward the storage section. The lights only partially worked down there, leaving sections of the basement swallowed in shadow every few feet. The whole place smelled faintly like mildew and dust. The knocking stopped completely once I stepped out. Of course it did. That somehow made it worse. I walked farther down the hallway, trying to figure out where the sound had been coming from, when I noticed one of the storage unit doors standing slightly open. That was unusual because the storage rooms all required keys. I stopped a few feet away, staring at the gap in the door. Then from inside the storage unit, somebody whispered, "Hello." I nearly jumped out of my skin. The voice sounded weak. Male. Young. My first thought, honestly, wasn't horror. It was confusion. I stepped closer. "Are you okay?" No response. I hesitated another second before slowly pulling the storage door open wider. The room inside was empty. Empty except for old furniture covered in plastic sheets. But something moved behind the sheets, very slightly, like someone shifting their weight. I immediately backed up. Then a hand slowly slid out from beneath one of the hanging plastic covers. I ran. I wish I could tell you I handled the situation calmly or logically, but absolutely not. The second I saw that hand, I turned around and speed walked back toward the laundry room, trying very hard not to fully panic. Behind me, I heard plastic rustling, then slow footsteps. Not running, just following. I got back into the laundry room and immediately realized my washer still had 20 minutes left. Fantastic. I stood there debating whether a work shirt was genuinely worth dying over when the footsteps stopped outside the room. Silence. Then slowly, one of the dryer doors behind me creaked open. I turned around so fast I almost slipped. The dryer spun slowly, even though it wasn't on. Inside the dark drum, something scratched lightly against the metal. Then another dryer door opened beside it. Then another, all by themselves. I grabbed my soaking wet clothes straight out of the washer, shoved them into the basket, and got out of there immediately. As I reached the stairwell, I looked back once. A man stood at the far end of the hallway near the storage units. Tall, very thin, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't moving, just watching me. And even from that distance, I could tell he was smiling. I barely slept that night. Not because I thought I'd seen a ghost or anything. Honestly, my first assumption was a homeless person. Maybe somebody is secretly living in the basement storage areas. It was creepy, sure, but still technically explainable. The smile bothered me, though. There was something deeply wrong about it. Not exaggerated, not supernatural, just emotionless. Like somebody pretending to smile without understanding why humans do it. The next morning, I reported everything to the building manager, a permanently irritated woman named Denise who looked like life itself annoyed her personally. When I mentioned the basement man, her expression changed immediately. "You saw someone down there?" "Yeah." "What did he look like?" I described him as best I could. "Tall, thin, dark hoodie, pale face, smiling." Denise went quiet for a second. Then she asked something that genuinely unsettled me. "Did he talk to you?" "Not really." She visibly relaxed after that, then immediately started pretending the whole thing wasn't a big deal. She claimed maintenance workers had probably left a storage unit unlocked, and maybe some random guy wandered in temporarily. She promised they'd check security footage. The conversation should have reassured me. Instead, it somehow made me more nervous, especially because later that evening, I saw maintenance workers changing the lock on the basement stairwell door. For about a week, nothing happened. No knocking, no weird laughter, no basement, man. I almost convinced myself I overreacted. Then one night, around 2 in the morning, my apartment door started knocking. Knock, knock, knock. I froze immediately, sitting there on my couch, because I recognized the rhythm instantly. Nobody should have been visiting me at that hour anyway. I stayed completely still listening. A few seconds passed. Then the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, patient. The same as before. I quietly walked toward the peephole and looked outside. The hallway was empty, completely empty. But farther down near the elevator, I noticed something wet on the carpet. Footprints, bare footprints leading down the hallway, toward my apartment. I didn't open the door. Absolutely not. Instead, I stood there staring through the peephole while my heart hammered hard enough to make me feel sick. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead. Nothing moved. Then slowly, a face leaned into view directly outside my door. I physically recoiled backward. It was the man from the basement. Up close, he looked even worse somehow. His skin seemed oddly pale and stretched tight against his face. His eyes looked sunken and tired, like he hadn't slept in weeks. But the smile stayed the same. Wide. Still. Wrong. He stared directly into the peephole like he knew I was there. Then he whispered, "I think there's someone downstairs." I didn't answer. The man stayed there, smiling for another few seconds before slowly stepping away from the door. I heard soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. Then silence. I waited nearly 10 minutes before checking outside again. The hallway was empty, but the wet footprints remained, and they led all the way to the elevator, which was still sitting open, waiting. I called the police after that. Not emergency services exactly. More non-emergency, because technically, some creepy smiling guy knocking on your door isn't illegal, unfortunately. 2 officers came by around 30 minutes later and checked the building. They found nobody in the basement or hallways. One of them suggested maybe somebody drunk wandered into the wrong apartment building. Sure, drunk people are famously known for standing silently outside doors at 2 in the morning, looking like skinwalkers. The officers also checked the security cameras with Denise. That part bothered me most afterward because Denise refused to tell me what they saw on the footage. She just kept saying, "We're handling it." Not exactly comforting. After that, other tenants started mentioning weird things too. A girl on the 5th floor claimed somebody knocked on her door overnight, asking to be let inside because he was locked out of the laundry room. An older man near the lobby insisted he saw someone standing motionless inside the basement stairwell for over an hour. A college kid claimed he heard people talking beneath the floor vents late at night. The story spread fast enough that people started joking about the laundry room guy, at least during the daytime. Nobody joked about him at night. Things escalated badly during a thunderstorm about 3 weeks later. I remember the exact night because the power flickered across the whole building while I was cooking dinner. Around midnight, the rain got so heavy it sounded like gravel hitting the windows. Then my work clothes dryer stopped working. Of course it did. I stared at the pile of damn clothes for a solid minute, debating whether unemployment was preferable to going back into that basement. Honestly, it almost was. But eventually I grabbed my laundry basket and headed downstairs, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The basement lights were already flickering when I got there. Only half the laundry room lights actually stayed on. The room looked much darker than usual. I hurriedly loaded my clothes into the dryer and stayed standing instead of sitting this time. No chance I was relaxing down there anymore. Then I noticed every machine door was open again. Every single one except mine. The knocking started almost immediately. Not distant this time. Right outside the laundry room. Knock, knock, knock. Then another door somewhere farther down the basement answered with the same pattern. Then another, and another, until the entire basement sounded like people softly knocking back and forth through the walls. I grabbed my laundry basket immediately. Nope, absolutely not. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room instantly, except for the faint spinning light inside my dryer. I heard movement outside, several footsteps, not one person, multiple, slowly walking through the basement hallway. I stood frozen, barely breathing, while rain hammered outside and those footsteps moved closer. Then somebody laughed quietly right outside the room. Another voice whispered something too muffled to understand. Then came the smiling man's voice. "Found you." I yanked the dryer open so hard it nearly came off the hinges and started shoving clothes into the basket as fast as possible. My hands shook so badly that I dropped half of them onto the floor. Outside the laundry room, I could hear several people walking now. Bare footsteps against concrete. Slow, dragging slightly. Then one of the washing machines behind me turned on by itself. Water exploded into the drum. Then another machine started. Then another. The entire room slowly came alive around me. Washers filling, dryers spinning, doors creaking open, and through all of it, laughing. Quiet laughing from multiple voices around the basement. I grabbed the basket and sprinted for the hallway. The emergency lights finally flickered on dimly red, and I saw them. People are standing throughout the basement corridor. At least 6 or 7, all motionless, all smiling. Some wore regular clothes. Others looked soaked completely through, like they'd been standing in rain for hours. One woman stood barefoot near the stairwell, staring directly at me, with blood running slowly down one leg. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Then all of them started knocking softly against the walls around them. Knock, knock, knock. In perfect rhythm, the smiling man stepped forward from the hallway darkness. His mouth looked wider now, somehow. Too wide. "I think there's someone downstairs," he said again. Then every person in the basement smiled wider simultaneously. I ran for the stairwell. Behind me, I finally heard them moving fast. Not sprinting. Worse. That horrible, uneven speed like people pretending to know how humans run. I flew up the stairs, nearly falling twice while hearing footsteps below me. The knocking echoed through the stairwell walls the entire way up. Knock, 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 knock. Closer, closer. Then suddenly, silence. I reached the lobby shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Denise stood near the office arguing with 2 police officers already inside the building. The second she saw me, her face dropped immediately, like she already knew. One of the officers tried calming me down while I explained everything, but halfway through my story, I noticed something strange. Nobody else in the lobby seemed confused. Scared, yes, but not surprised. This had happened before. Eventually, Denise pulled me aside privately and finally told me the truth, at least part of it. Several years earlier, before I moved into the building, a tenant disappeared in the basement laundry room overnight. Then another. Then another. No bodies were ever found. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Just abandoned laundry left inside the machines. After the 3rd disappearance, security cameras were installed throughout the basement. A month later, one of the cameras recorded several people standing motionless inside the laundry room overnight, smiling at the camera. The footage glitched repeatedly before cutting out entirely. When maintenance workers checked the basement afterward, the room was empty, except for wet footprints, and every machine door hangs open. I moved out 2 weeks later. Didn't even finish my lease. I barely slept during those final nights there because every few hours I'd hear knocking somewhere in the building. Always the same rhythm. Sometimes from hallways. Sometimes from vents. Sometimes directly outside my apartment door. The last night there, I heard the laundry machines running through my bedroom floor at around 3 in the morning. The basement had already been closed off by police after multiple tenants complained. Nobody should have been down there. Still, I heard dryers spinning beneath me for nearly an hour. Then came the laughing. Quiet, distant, almost friendly somehow. And just before sunrise, somebody knocked softly on my apartment door one final time. Knock, knock, knock. Then a man's voice whispered through the hallway. "I think there's someone downstairs." Story 3. I knew the woman in apartment 214 was dead before anybody told me. That probably sounds horrible to say, especially because at the time I was working maintenance in the building and should have been thinking logically instead of jumping to conclusions. But there was something about that hallway that night that made every instinct in my body start screaming long before anyone found her. The weird part is that nothing looked wrong at first. That's what I still think about. How normal everything looked. The building I worked in wasn't some creepy abandoned complex or old haunted place. It was actually pretty nice. For floors, newer carpeting, clean lobby, quiet tenants, mostly older people and young couples. The kind of place where people nodded politely in the elevator but never really talked to each other. It was calm, predictable, honestly kind of boring most nights, which was exactly why what happened stood out so badly. I was 27 at the time and had been working there for almost a year doing overnight maintenance and emergency calls. Mostly easy stuff. Leaking sinks, locked doors, broken washing machines. Once, I had to help a guy get his cat out of the ceiling because, apparently, the animal had climbed through an open vent during renovations. That was probably the most exciting thing that had happened before this. My shift started at 6 in the evening and ended around 2 in the morning. Most nights, I just walked the building, listening to podcasts while fixing little problems tenants reported during the day. The night this happened was cold outside. Late November. One of those nights where the parking lot looked wet even though it hadn't snowed yet. The sky had this heavy gray look to it that made everything outside feel dead quiet. Around 8:30, I was in the basement replacing light panels near the laundry room when the office phone rang upstairs. I remember being annoyed because I just got in the ladder position perfectly. I climbed back upstairs, expecting another stupid complaint about heating. Instead, it was a tenant from the third floor. Apartment 307, an older guy named Mr. Barlow, who called almost every week for something ridiculous. The woman in 214 has her television too loud again, he said immediately. It sounds like scratching. I frowned. Scratching? Yes, like static or something. It's vibrating through the floor. That caught my attention because apartment 214 was directly beneath him. I told him I'd check it out. At first, I wasn't worried. Noise complaints happen constantly in apartment buildings. Usually it was music or people arguing or somebody vacuuming at midnight for some reason. But as soon as I stepped onto the second floor, something felt off. The hallway was dimmer than usual. Not dark exactly, just dull, like the lights weren't fully awake. The second floor hallway was long and straight with apartments lining both sides and a small window at the far end overlooking the parking lot. Usually, you could hear televisions through doors or dishes clinking or people talking quietly. That night, it was completely silent. Not peaceful and silent either. Heavy silence. I walked toward apartment 214 and started hearing the noise before I even reached it. Mr. Barlow was right. It sounded like scratching. Very light. Very repetitive. Like something dragging slowly across fabric. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. I stopped outside the door and listened harder. At first, I assumed it was a chair moving across the floor, or maybe a vacuum cleaner. But the rhythm was wrong. Too slow. Too deliberate. I knocked lightly. Maintenance. The scratching stopped instantly. That alone made my stomach tighten. No footsteps came to the door. No voice answered. Nothing. I waited maybe 15 seconds before knocking again, louder this time. Still nothing. Now, technically, I couldn't enter apartments without permission unless there was an emergency, and at this point, I didn't really have one. So I leaned closer to the door, trying to hear movement inside. That's when I noticed something else. The smell. It wasn't strong yet, just faint. But underneath the normal apartment smell was something sour and rotten lingering in the air. Not enough to immediately panic me, just enough to bother me. I stepped back and called the tenant's phone from the office number. No answer. I tried again, straight to voicemail. The scratching started again, this time closer, right on the other side of the door. Scrape, scrape. I don't know why, but every hair on my arm stood up, because it no longer sounded random. It sounded intentional, like something moving slowly toward me. I knocked harder. Mom. Nothing. Then, suddenly, the scratching stopped again, and something softly bumped the door from inside. Just once. I actually took a step backward. The building suddenly felt cold. I remember looking down the hallway, expecting someone else to be there. Another tenant. Anybody. But it was empty. Then I heard the elevator ding at the far end. A young guy stepped out carrying grocery bags and immediately looked at me weirdly for standing frozen outside somebody's apartment. "You okay?" he asked. I laughed awkwardly and said yeah. The second another person appeared, the fear instantly felt stupid. That's how these situations always work. Fear feels ridiculous the moment somebody else enters the picture. I headed downstairs, intending to tell myself it was probably an old woman moving furniture around. But halfway down the stairs, I realized something. I had never actually seen the tenant in 214. Not once, which was strange because I knew almost everybody in the building. I went to the office computer and checked the tenant records. Apartment 214 belonged to a woman named Eleanor Vance, 62 years old. No emergency contacts listed. No recent maintenance requests. Nothing unusual. Still, the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me alone. About an hour later, another complaint came in, this time from apartment 216. A younger woman saying she heard dragging noises and thought somebody was hurt. So now I had enough reason to investigate properly. I grabbed the master key. The entire walk back upstairs, my chest felt tight. Not fear exactly, more like dread. Like my body already knew something my brain did. The hallway was somehow even quieter now. The scratching had stopped completely. I stood outside 214 listening one more time. Nothing. I knocked hard. Maintenance. I'm coming in. Still no response. I unlocked the door and immediately smelled it. That heavy rotten smell hit me so hard I almost gagged. The apartment was dark except for the television flickering in the living room. Static. That was the scratching noise. The TV volume was low, but the static crackled through the apartment in uneven bursts. SCRRSHHH. SCRRSHHH. I stepped inside carefully. Hello. No answer. The apartment looked mostly normal at first glance. Blankets are folded on the couch. Half-finished tea on the coffee table. Lamp on. But then I noticed the scratch marks. Thin lines carved into the hardwood floor leading down the hallway, as if something sharp had been dragged repeatedly back and forth. I followed them slowly. The smell got worse. Much worse. Every instinct told me to leave, but I kept walking. At the end of the hallway was the bedroom. The door was halfway open, and something inside was moving, very slightly. I froze. It looked like somebody was sitting on the floor beside the bed, rocking gently. My brain immediately relaxed for one stupid second because I thought the tenant was alive. Then the television static behind me cut louder for a moment, and the figure stopped moving completely. Dead still. I don't know how to explain this properly, but there's a certain kind of stillness humans aren't supposed to have. The second it stopped moving, I knew something was horribly wrong. I backed away slowly and pulled my phone out to call 911. While I was explaining the situation to dispatch, I accidentally glanced toward the bedroom again. The figure hadn't moved, but now I could see it more clearly. It wasn't rocking. The ceiling fan above it was rotating slowly, and long gray hair attached to the figure was swaying slightly with the air. The woman was dead, sitting upright against the side of the bed, eyes open, skin gray, and tied around one wrist was a phone charger cord leading upward toward the bed frame. Like somebody had positioned her there afterward. I stumbled backward so fast I hit the wall. Dispatch kept asking questions, but I barely heard them, because something else suddenly stood out to me. The scratch marks. They didn't stop in the bedroom. They continued onto the ceiling above the woman. I tilted my head upward. There was an attic hatch slightly open, and fresh scratch marks all around it. My stomach dropped. Somebody had been in the attic. Very slowly, I backed toward the hallway. Then I heard it, a soft movement above me. Tiny, but unmistakable, like weight shifting carefully overhead. I stopped breathing. Another sound followed. A faint creak moves across the ceiling. Then another. Slow footsteps. Right above me. I whispered into the phone, "Somebody's still in here." Dispatch immediately told me to leave the apartment. I didn't need convincing. I backed into the hallway without taking my eyes off the attic hatch. The second I crossed the doorway into the hall, something softly tapped the ceiling above me. 3 taps, directly overhead. I ran. I genuinely don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. I nearly slipped reaching the stairwell and slammed into the railing hard enough to bruise my shoulder. By the time officers arrived, I was waiting outside, shaking so badly I couldn't hold my coffee cup properly. They searched the apartment first, then the attic. They found nobody. But they did find signs somebody had absolutely been living up there. Food wrappers, blankets, empty water bottles, and dozens of strange scratch marks carved into the wood beams. Not words, just lines, hundreds of them, like tally marks. The coroner estimated Eleanor had likely been dead for at least 2 days, which meant somebody had been sitting in that apartment with her body the entire time, possibly above me in the attic while I walked through the apartment. That alone messed me up badly. But it got worse, a lot worse, because 3 nights later, I saw him. My shift technically started at 6, but after what happened, management had temporarily moved me to earlier evening hours while police continued investigating. Everybody in the building was talking about the attic guy. Most tenants assumed it was some homeless person secretly living up there. Police didn't say much publicly, only that there were signs someone had occupied the attic space for an extended period. The second floor tenants were terrified. A few moved out within a month. I almost quit myself, honestly, but I needed the money. And after a few days, the building slowly started feeling normal again, at least during daylight. Nighttime was different. Every hallway creak suddenly sounded deliberate. Every elevator ding made my chest tighten. I started noticing how many blind corners existed in the building. How easy it would be for somebody to stand quietly somewhere watching. 3 nights later, I was replacing a light fixture near the parking garage entrance around 9:30. Rain was hitting the concrete outside hard enough to sound like static. I remember that specifically because it instantly reminded me of the television in apartment 214. I was finishing up when motion caught my eye through the garage window. Somebody is walking slowly across the parking lot. At first, I barely paid attention. Then I noticed the person wasn't carrying an umbrella despite the rain, and they were moving strangely. Slow, stiff, almost drifting. I stood up, trying to see more clearly through the glass. The person reached the edge of the parking lot light. A man, tall, thin, dark hoodie, soaked from the rain. His head tilted slightly downward, and even from that distance, I could tell something about him was wrong. Not physically wrong exactly, just empty. Like the guy in those overnight grocery store stories you hear online. The ones where somebody doesn't behave humanely enough. He stopped walking, very slowly turned his head toward the building, toward me, and smiled. Not a big, crazy grin, just enough. Enough to make my entire body go cold. Because even through the rain and darkness, I recognized him instantly from the security footage police had shown management earlier that day. The attic man. I dropped the screwdriver in my hand. The second it clattered against the floor, he turned and calmly walked behind a row of parked cars. I sprinted for the office phone. Police arrived within minutes and searched the surrounding area. Nothing. No footprints either because the rain had washed everything away. But after that night, things inside the building started getting strange again. Tiny things at first. Tenants are reporting soft footsteps overhead, scratching sounds in the walls. Storage room doors found open. One elderly tenant claimed somebody knocked softly on her bedroom wall every night around 2 in the morning. 3 knocks exactly. Maintenance checked everything constantly. Nothing was ever found. Then came the security footage. That was what finally broke me. The building manager called me into the office one afternoon, looking pale. He pulled up footage from the second floor hallway recorded around 3 in the morning. At first, it looked normal. Empty hallway, flickering lights. Then movement appeared at the far end near apartment 214. A figure slowly steps out of the stairwell. Tall, dark hoodie, the attic man. He stood completely still, facing the camera for almost 2 full minutes. Not moving, not blinking, nothing. Then he slowly turned his head toward apartment 214 and walked directly to the door. The weirdest part? The apartment was empty. Police had sealed it after Eleanor's death. The man reached the door and just stood there, motionless, for another entire minute. Then the footage glitched, static for maybe 4 seconds. When the image returned, he was gone. No footage of him leaving. No stairwell movement. Nothing. Just gone. The police searched again after seeing that video. Still nothing. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. Nothing. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Every sound in my own apartment started freaking me out, especially scratching noises. I began checking closets before bed, checking behind shower curtains. I even started sleeping with the television on because silence made me anxious. Then one night around midnight, I got a call from the building manager asking if I could stop by quickly because a tenant reported somebody knocking on walls again. I almost said no. I should have said no, but I drove over anyway. The building felt wrong immediately. Have you ever walked into a place and instantly felt tension without knowing why? The lobby was empty. Rain tapped softly against the front windows, and somewhere upstairs, faintly, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps. I actually stood frozen by the elevator listening. Another tenant stepped into the lobby carrying laundry and casually said, "Second floor, ladies complaining again." I forced myself to laugh, but my stomach already felt sick. I took the stairs. The second floor hallway lights flickered as I stepped out. Apartment 214 sat dark and empty halfway down the corridor. I started walking toward it. Knock, knock, knock. This time louder, coming from inside the wall beside the apartment. I stopped, listened, nothing. Then softly above me, scrape. I looked up instantly. The attic hatch at the end of the hallway was slightly open again, just barely. And I swear to God this next part is true. Something moved behind the gap. Not fast, slow enough that at first I thought it was my imagination. Then pale fingers slowly curled around the edge from inside the darkness. I ran before my brain even processed it. I don't remember getting downstairs. I just remember bursting into the lobby, gasping for air while my heart tried to punch through my chest. Police came again. They searched the attic again. Nobody. Nothing. No blankets this time. No food wrappers. Just dust. But one officer quietly admitted to me that the attic hatch had definitely been open when they arrived. I quit 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. The lack of answers messed with me worse than if they'd actually caught somebody. Because if it were just some disturbed, homeless man, why keep coming back to an empty apartment? Why stand outside, motionless in the middle of the night? Why the tapping? Why the scratches? And why did the security footage glitch every single time he appeared? The building still exists. I actually drove past it last year while visiting a friend nearby. The second floor window for apartment 214 was lit up. New tenants probably. Normal people living normal lives. But as I sat at the red light outside, I noticed something in one of the upper windows near the roofline. A figure, standing perfectly still behind the attic window, watching the parking lot, watching the street, watching me. The light changed before I could fully process it, and I didn't look back again. Story 4. The hotel manager told me not to answer any calls from room 417 after midnight. He said it casually too, which somehow made it worse. Not dramatic, not nervous, just exhausted, like he'd repeated the sentence too many times already. I remember laughing a little because I genuinely thought he was joking. I had only been working there for 3 days, and every overnight job I'd ever had came with at least one older employee who tried messing with the new guy, especially night shifts. People get weird during night shifts, but the manager just stared at me from across the front desk with this dead serious look and said, "I'm not kidding. If that room calls, let it ring." Then he grabbed his coat and left. That should have been enough for me to immediately quit and go work literally anywhere else. A gas station, a grocery store, one of those miserable overnight warehouse jobs where people forklift boxes in complete silence for 8 hours straight while country music echoes through concrete walls. Anything would have been better than that hotel. The place was called the Ashdown Suites. Those suites was generous. It was one of those older roadside hotels right outside the city where people stayed for a night or two during business trips. 4 floors, long, dim hallways, brown carpets designed specifically to hide stains, tiny elevator that groaned every time it moved. Nothing openly creepy, Just old. The kind of building that always smelled faintly like dust and chlorine from the indoor pool. I was 24 and desperate for money at the time. My previous job had cut hours, my rent had gone up, and I took the overnight front desk position because it paid $2 more an hour than daytime shifts. At first, the job honestly seemed easy. Check in late guests, answer phones, restock the little snack shelf in the lobby, maybe help somebody who locked themselves out of their room. Most nights after 1 in the morning were dead quiet. The hotel sat near the highway, so after the late travelers checked in, the building basically shut down. Just humming lights and empty hallways until sunrise. The first 2 nights were completely normal, boring even. I watched YouTube at the desk most of the time while drinking terrible coffee from the breakfast machine. A few guests came through around midnight. One old woman complained about her air conditioner rattling. A guy asked if we sold toothpaste. That was it. Then came Friday night. The manager, whose name was Dale, looked unusually tense during shift handoff. He kept glancing toward the hallway behind the desk while explaining the nightly paperwork. Finally, he paused and rubbed his eyes. "Oh," he said, "one more thing." That was when he told me about room 417. I smiled immediately because the number sounded so specific that it had to be a setup. "What happens if I answer?" I asked. "Just don't." He handed me the master key ring. Seriously. Then he left. I stood there for a few seconds, smiling to myself before realizing something. The hotel only had 4 floors, which meant room 417 was at the very end of the top hallway. For some reason, that detail bothered me instantly. I told myself it was because of horror movies. Every creepy room is always at the end of the hallway. Still, curiosity started eating at me almost immediately. Around 11:30, I checked the booking computer. Room 417 was listed as vacant. No current guest. No recent check-in. Nothing unusual. So now I was even more convinced Dale had been screwing with me. At exactly 12:14, the front desk phone rang. Not the main line, the internal hotel line. I glanced automatically at the monitor showing room numbers. For 117, I actually laughed. Out loud. "Okay," I muttered. The phone rang again. And again. No clue why, but I suddenly didn't want to answer anymore. Something about seeing that room number glowing on the screen made my stomach tighten. It rang 12 times before stopping. Then silence. I waited for the punchline. Nothing happened. No manager jumping out laughing. No hidden camera prank. Just silence and the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. I shook it off and went back to scrolling through my phone. About 20 minutes later, the elevator dinged. A man stepped out carrying a black suitcase. Tall guy, business looking, mid-40s maybe. He walked to the desk, looking exhausted. "Checking in," he said. I smiled, relieved to finally interact with an actual human again. While pulling up his reservation, I noticed him glancing repeatedly toward the hallway leading to the elevators. "You okay?" I asked casually. He hesitated, then quietly asked, "Is the 4th floor under renovation?" "No," I said. He looked unsettled. I heard somebody dragging furniture around up there. Instantly, my skin prickled, because the sound he described reminded me of something immediately. Scraping, like the attic story I'd heard years earlier online. I laughed awkwardly. Probably housekeeping, but housekeeping definitely wasn't there at 12:30 in the morning. The man nodded slowly, as if he didn't fully believe me. I gave him room 208. As he walked toward the elevator, he suddenly stopped. "You ever notice hotels feel different after midnight?" he asked. I remember smiling politely while internally thinking this guy was about to tell me he hunted ghosts recreationally. But he just shook his head. "Never mind." Then he left. The phone rang again the second the elevator doors closed. For 117, my chest tightened harder this time. I stared at it, ringing. Something about the timing bothered me. Like whoever or whatever was calling knew exactly when I'd be alone again. The ringing stopped after a minute, then immediately started again. I picked up before I could stop myself. Front desk. Static. Not loud. Very soft. Like distant rain. I frowned. "Hello." Nothing. Then faintly underneath the static, I heard breathing. Slow, uneven breathing. The kind somebody makes after crying for a long time. Every muscle in my body tightened. Hello. The breathing stopped instantly. Then came a soft sound. Scrape. My stomach dropped. The same dragging sound the guest described earlier. It sounded close to the phone, like something being slowly pulled across the carpet. Then a woman whispered, "Please." The line cut dead. I stared at the receiver for a full 10 seconds before putting it down. My first instinct was honestly annoyance. Not fear. Annoyance. Because now I assumed some guest was messing with me. Probably drunk. Maybe trying to freak out the new overnight employee. I checked the system again. Room 417 is still vacant. No guest assigned. No maintenance requests. Nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. It didn't sound playful. It sounded terrified. Around 1 in the morning, I finally decided to check the room myself. Which was stupid. Incredibly stupid. But curiosity mixed with boredom is dangerous on overnight shifts. I took the elevator up, carrying the master keys. The 4th floor hallway was colder than the others. Not dramatically freezing, just enough to notice. The lights seemed dimmer too. Old hotels always have lighting that makes every hallway look vaguely haunted, but this floor genuinely felt wrong. Too quiet. No televisions behind doors. No ice machine humming. Nothing. Room 417 sat at the very end beside the emergency exit. The carpet looked darker near that part of the hallway for some reason. I walked slowly toward it. Halfway there, I heard something. Very faint. Scrape. I stopped immediately. Another scrape followed. Coming from inside 417. My brain instantly tried rational explanations. Maybe plumbing. Maybe somebody in another room is moving luggage. Maybe the sound traveled weirdly through the walls. Still, my heart had started beating noticeably harder. I reached the door and listened. Silence. I knocked lightly. Front desk. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. Using the master key suddenly felt like an incredibly bad idea. But before I could talk myself out of it, I unlocked the door. The room was completely dark and cold. Not air conditioning cold. Winter air is cold. Like a window was open somewhere. I reached inside and turned on the lights. Nothing looked unusual initially. Bed made. Television off. Bedroom door open. No lagi. No guest. But the room smelled strange. Vet. Like rain-soaked carpet. I stepped farther inside. That was when I noticed the closet door. It was slightly open, and scratch marks covered the wood near the handle. Thin little lines carved vertically into the paint. My stomach tightened again. Hello. Silence. Then softly. Knock. I jumped so hard I actually swore out loud. The sound came from the bathroom. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 I stared at the open bathroom doorway, unable to move. Another knock came. This time softer. Like fingertips tapping tile. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Instead, because apparently I'm an idiot, I walked toward the bathroom. The light inside flickered weakly. Bathtub empty. Sink dry. Nothing there. Then I noticed something in the mirror. Words, written faintly through condensation. Don't look under the bed. I physically backed into the wall. My first thought was that another employee had somehow set this up. Had to be. No other explanation made sense. But while staring at the mirror, I realized something worse. The room wasn't humid enough for condensation. Not even close. Yet the letters slowly dripped downward as if freshly written. That was enough for me. I turned immediately toward the door and heard the scrape again, right behind me, from the bedroom. Scrape. Very slowly, I looked back. The bed skirt was moving, just slightly, like something underneath had shifted. I don't think fear really hit fully until that moment. Because suddenly, every stupid horror movie decision became real. I knew something was under that bed, and worse, part of me knew it wanted me to look. The bed skirt moved again. Tiny movement, then complete stillness. I left. Immediately. Not sprinting. Not dramatic. I simply walked out as fast as possible while pretending not to panic. The second I reached the hallway, I hurried back toward the elevator and heard footsteps behind me. Slow footsteps. Not rushed. Just following. I looked back. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear them. Soft carpeted steps approaching steadily from behind. I hit the elevator button repeatedly. The footsteps kept coming. Closer, closer, then stopped completely the second the elevator doors opened. I got inside and slammed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I glanced once down the hallway. Somebody stood near room 417. Tall figure, motionless, too far away to see clearly, but I could tell they were facing directly toward me. The lobby never felt so comforting in my life. I told myself I'd imagined most of it. Seriously, the human brain does weird things at night when you're tired. That's what I kept repeating. The writing on the mirror had probably already been there. The sounds were old pipes. The footsteps were my imagination. The figure at the end of the hall was probably a guest. Simple, normal. But around 2:30, the business guy from room 208 came downstairs looking pale. "There's someone in the hallway upstairs," he said immediately. Every hair on my body stood up. "What do you mean?" I opened my door because I heard somebody dragging something. Scrape. Then I saw a woman standing near the stairwell. Cold flooded my chest. She was just standing there. He nodded slowly. She looked wet. I genuinely considered quitting right then. Instead, I offered to walk upstairs with him because apparently I still hadn't learned anything. The second we stepped onto the second floor, the man stopped walking. The hallway was empty, but water trailed across the carpet. Long wet streaks, like something soaked had been dragged slowly down the hall. The businessman whispered, "What the hell?" The trail led toward the stairwell and stopped. No footprints, no person, nothing. Then somewhere above us. Knock, knock, knock. Fourth floor. The businessman looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke. Another knock echoed faintly overhead. Then came the dragging sound again. Scrape. Longer this time, like something heavy moving across carpet. The businessman immediately backed toward the elevator. "Nope," he muttered. "Nope." And honestly, fair enough. He went back to his room and locked himself inside. I should have done the same downstairs. Instead, around 3:15, I checked the security cameras. That was the worst mistake of the entire night. The fourth floor hallway camera showed room 417 clearly. At first, nothing happened. Then, movement appeared near the emergency exit. A woman slowly stepped into frame. Tall, thin, hair hanging wet around her face. Hospital gown, bare feet. I froze, staring at the screen, because no guest had entered the fourth floor all night. I would have seen them. The woman moved strangely, not limping exactly, but delayed, like her body reacted a second too late to each movement. She stopped outside room 417, then turned slowly toward the camera. Even through grainy footage, I could see her eyes looked completely black. The screen suddenly filled with static. When the image returned, the hallway was empty again. Then the phone rang. For 117, I didn't answer. It rang again and again. Then all the lobby lights flickered simultaneously. The television in the breakfast area turned on by itself. Static filled the room. SCRRSHHH. My entire body went cold. Then, through the static, a whisper, under the bed. I unplugged the television immediately. The whispering stopped. I stood there shaking so hard I nearly dropped the cord. Then came a loud bang upstairs, followed by screaming. Human screaming. I ran for the elevator before my brain could stop me. The fourth floor hallway lights were off when the doors opened. Only emergency exit signs glowed dim red at the far end. And somebody was crying. Soft, desperate crying. Coming from room 417. The door stood open now. I should have left. Called the police. Done anything smarter, literally. Instead, I walked toward it. Because somebody sounded hurt. Inside the room, the television blasted static loudly enough to hurt my ears. The bathroom light flickered, and the crying came from beneath the bed. I stopped dead. Every instinct screamed not to look, but the crying sounded real. Terrified. A woman whispering, "Help me." I crouched slightly before my brain fully caught up, and then I noticed something horrifying. The crying looped. The same every few seconds, like a recording. "Help me. Pause. Help me. Pause." My blood went ice cold. Then slowly, very slowly, something beneath the bed breathed. Not the recording. Something else. Deep. Vet. Too close. I backed away immediately. The bed skirt lifted slightly, and fingers slowly curled out from underneath. Long, pale fingers bending the wrong direction. Then a face started emerging, smiling. I ran. I don't remember getting downstairs. I just remember bursting through the lobby while alarms suddenly blared overhead. Every phone in the hotel began ringing simultaneously. Not exaggerating. Every room line, all at once. The sound filled the building like screaming insects. Police arrived after I finally managed to explain what happened. They searched the hotel completely. Found nothing. No woman. No intruder. Nothing under the bed. But they did find something else. Old news articles are hidden in storage downstairs. Apparently, years earlier, a woman had been murdered in room 417 by a man who hid beneath the bed waiting for housekeeping to leave. Afterward, guests constantly reported calls from the empty room. Scratching sounds, wet footprints, a crying woman. The hotel kept reopening the room because management thought the stories were hurting business. I quit the next morning. Didn't even finish the shift. A month later, the Ashdown Suites permanently closed after a pipe burst flooded most of the fourth floor. At least officially. But here's the part that still bothers me. About 6 months ago, I was driving through that area late at night. The hotel still stood abandoned beside the highway. Dark, empty, rotting. And as I passed it, I glanced toward the fourth floor windows. Room 417 was lit up. Static flickered blue behind the curtains. And standing inside the window was a woman. Completely still, watching the road. Story 5. I realized the man in the security office wasn't reacting to the alarms anymore. At first, that didn't seem strange. The building I worked in had constant issues. Motion sensors would trip for no reason. Elevators would stop between floors for 30 seconds and then start working again. And lights would flicker in empty conference rooms at 3 in the morning like the place was haunted by accountants forced to keep doing spreadsheets after death. After a while, you stopped reacting to every little thing. But this was different, because the alarm had been going off for almost 4 minutes straight, and the security guard was just sitting there staring at the monitors. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. I worked overnight maintenance in a corporate office tower downtown. Nothing glamorous. Most nights, I changed ceiling tiles, fixed leaking sinks, reset electrical panels, unclogged toilets that people somehow destroyed during normal business hours, things like that. The building had 18 floors, most of them empty after 7 at night, except for a couple of cleaning crews and security. The company that owned the tower was unbelievably cheap, so overnight staffing was usually just one security guard and me. That was it. One guy is fixing the building. One guy is watching the cameras. Honestly, most nights were boring enough to make you question your life choices. I spent more time listening to humming fluorescent lights than talking to actual people. The only reason I took the job was that the pay was decent and overnight shifts fit my sleep schedule better. I've always been a night person, not in a cool, mysterious way either. More in a my brain decides to remember embarrassing moments from middle school at 2 in the morning kind of way. The security guard that night was named Leon. Leon had worked there forever. Late 50s, maybe. Tall guy, gray mustache. Always smelled faintly like burnt coffee and wintergreen gum. He talked slowly, moved slowly, blinked slowly. The type of guy who looked permanently exhausted by humanity. But he was nice. Every night around midnight, we'd sit in the lobby for 10 minutes while I drank vending machine coffee, and he'd complain about politics, teenagers, or the vending machine itself. Mostly the vending machine. This thing steals more money than my ex-wife. He'd mutter at least twice a week. That night started completely normal. Too normal, honestly. It was raining outside, the kind of steady rain that makes the city feel abandoned after midnight. Water streaked down the huge lobby windows, while traffic outside slowly disappeared until the streets looked empty. I got in around 10:30 and started replacing damaged ceiling panels on the 7th floor. Some office worker upstairs had overflowed a sink earlier that day, and the water leaked through the ceiling tiles below. Around midnight, I took the elevator back down to the lobby. Leon was sitting in the security office watching an old action movie on his phone while half paying attention to the camera feeds. "You see the weather?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "Unfortunately, whole city's gonna flood. You say that every time it rains. One day I'll be right." I grabbed a coffee from the machine. It immediately got stuck. Leon pointed at it without even looking. "Told you." By 1:30, I was up on the 14th floor, changing light ballasts in a hallway. That's when the first alarm happened. A soft chime came through the building speakers. Not loud, just enough to get your attention. "Motion detected. Floor 16. I stopped working for a second. Normally, Leon would reset those immediately. Sometimes pigeons got into the stairwell somehow. Sometimes cleaning crews forgot to check out. False alarms happen all the time, but the alert stayed active longer than usual. About 30 seconds later, my radio crackled. "Leon?" I asked. "Nothing." Then finally, "Probably nothing." His voice sounded strange. Flat, like he was distracted. I shrugged it off and went back to work. A few minutes later, another alert sounded. "Motion detected. Floor 16. Again. Then 30 seconds later. "Motion detected. Floor 16. I remember lowering the screwdriver slowly and staring down the empty hallway. The building suddenly felt too quiet. Most office towers have noise constantly. Air systems, elevators, electrical humming, distant plumbing sounds. But for some reason, the 14th floor felt dead silent. Then my radio crackled again. This time Leon spoke before I could. "You up there?" "Yeah." Long pause. "You see anybody?" "No." Another pause. Then, "Okay." That was it. No explanation. No normal Leon sarcasm. Just okay. Around 2:15, I finally headed downstairs to grab supplies from maintenance storage. The security office sat just behind the front desk in the lobby. It was small, barely bigger than a closet, with monitors covering one wall. Leon was sitting there exactly where I'd left him earlier. Only now the alarm was going off continuously. Soft chiming every few seconds. "Motion detected. Floor 16. Motion detected. Floor 16. Motion detected. Floor 16. Leon didn't react at all. He just stared at the screens. That's when I noticed something weird. Every monitor was normal except one. Camera 16. The image was dark. Not black. Just dim. Like the lights on that floor weren't fully working. "You gonna reset that?" I asked. No response. I looked at him. "Leon," slowly, without taking his eyes off the monitor, he said, "Do you know how long someone can stand still before it stops hurting?" I laughed nervously. "What?" No response. The alarm chimed again. "Motion detected. Floor 16. Leon leaned slightly closer to the screen. He keeps moving closer to the camera. A cold feeling spread through my stomach. "What are you talking about?" He finally looked at me, and I swear his face looked pale. Not scared exactly, more like deeply unsettled. "There's a man on 16. "Okay, call the police then." I did. You did. They said nobody triggered entry points. I stared at the screen. The camera image was grainy. Dark hallway. Conference room doors. Water-stained carpet. Nothing else. Then Leon pointed. "There." At first, I didn't see it. Then I realized there was a shape standing at the end of the hallway. Perfectly still. So far away it almost blended into the darkness. My stomach dropped. "Is that a person?" Leon nodded once. "He's been standing there for 40 minutes. I immediately grabbed the desk phone. "You said you already called the police?" "They checked the exterior. Nobody got in." "That doesn't make any sense." Leon swallowed. "He wasn't there when the cameras first triggered." "What?" "He just appeared." I stared at the monitor again. The figure looked tall, thin. One arm hangs lower than the other. Completely motionless. "You sure this isn't some homeless guy?" Leon didn't answer. Then the figure moved. Not walking, not stepping, just suddenly closer. Like frames had been skipped. I physically recoiled from the monitor. "What the hell?" Leon whispered. "That's what it's been doing." The motion alert chimed again. Then suddenly every monitor flickered. Just once. But during that flicker, camera 16 changed. The figure was much closer now. Close enough to clearly see its head tilted sideways. close enough to see it smiling. I know how ridiculous that sounds. If someone told me this story a year ago, I'd assume they were exaggerating or half asleep. But there was something deeply wrong about the way it smiled. Too wide, too still, like someone trying to imitate a human expression without understanding it. Leon finally stood up. I'm going upstairs. No, you're not. He's on my floor now. What does that even mean? Leon grabbed his flashlight from the desk. The motion alert chimed again. Motion detected. Floor 15. Neither of us spoke, because neither of us had seen the figure leave 16. The elevator dinged softly nearby. Both of us turned instantly. The elevator doors slowly opened onto the empty lobby. No one inside, but the floor indicator above the doors still glowed. 15. Leon actually took a step backward. I had never seen that man nervous before. Not once. Not even during medical emergencies or fire alarms. But now his hands were shaking slightly. The elevator doors closed again. A second later, ding, the elevator reopened. Still empty. Now the indicator read. 14. The motion alert chimed again. Motion detected. Floor 14. I grabbed my radio. Okay, screw this. We wait outside for the police. Leon didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the elevator. Ding. 13. The doors opened again. Empty. Ding. 12. Empty. Ding. 11. Empty. Each time the doors opened, I felt this awful anticipation build in my chest. Like, eventually it wouldn't be empty anymore. The elevator kept descending. 10. 11. 12. The motion alert continued after every floor. Almost perfectly synced. Motion detected. Floor 8. 7. 8. 9. Leon suddenly whispered. It wants us to watch. I backed away from the elevator slowly. My entire body felt cold. Then the lights flickered. Just once. When they stabilized, the elevator indicator showed. 2. It skipped 3 floors. The doors opened. Still empty. But now I noticed something on the elevator floor. That footprints. Not shoe prints. But footprints. Long. Almost skeletal looking. Like someone with impossibly thin feet had stepped through water. They led out of the elevator, into the lobby, and stopped halfway across the floor. Like whoever made them had simply vanished. Leon whispered, "Nope." Honestly, hearing a 50-something security guard quietly say nope was almost enough to break the tension for half a second. Almost. Then the motion alert chimed again. Motion detected. Lobby. Every monitor in the security office suddenly turned to static. At the same moment, something knocked softly against the front glass doors. 3 knocks. Slow. Controlled. We both turned. A man stood outside in the rain. Tall. Soaked. One arm hangs lower than the other. Smiling. I think my brain tried to rationalize it immediately. Some random guy. Homeless person. Prank. Anything normal. But nothing about him felt normal. The biggest problem was the timing. There was no possible way he could have gotten downstairs before the elevator, unless he'd already been outside. But then, who was on the cameras? The man knocked again. 3 soft taps against the glass. Leon grabbed the radio mic. Police ETA? Static answered him. The man outside slowly raised one hand, then pointed directly at me. Not aggressively, just deliberately, like recognition. Then he smiled wider. I took a step backward instinctively. That's when the lights went out. Completely. The lobby dropped into darkness, except for dim emergency lighting near the exits. Outside, rain hammered against the windows. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then Leon whispered, "Don't look at the glass." "What?" "Don't look at the glass." Naturally, I looked immediately. The man was gone, but there was now a wet handprint on the outside of the door. At eye level, and another one lower down, and another, like he pressed both hands and his forehead against the glass. Looking in, the emergency lights barely illuminated the lobby. Everything looked wrong under them. Too dark, too stretched. I heard water dripping somewhere nearby. Then a soft scraping sound echoed from the hallway, leading toward the offices behind the lobby. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. like something wet dragging slowly across the carpet. Leon grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "You hear that?" Before I answered, the sound stopped. Then came a voice, very soft, from the hallway. "Leon." It sounded almost correct, human, but slightly off somehow, like someone mimicking speech after only hearing it a few times. Leon's grip tightened instantly. The voice spoke again, closer this time. "Leon, then, can you help me?" I felt every hair on my arm stand up, because the voice sounded exactly like me. Leon pulled me toward the security office and slammed the door shut. "What is happening?" I whispered. He locked the door. I saw this once before. I stared at him. "What?" He kept looking at the hallway through the narrow window in the door. "Years ago. Different building. You're seriously telling me this is normal for you?" "No." His voice cracked slightly. "That's why I quit security the first time." Another scrape echoed outside. Closer now. Then silence. I realized Leon was breathing heavily. "You want to explain literally any of this?" He finally looked at me. "There are people who get into buildings after hours." "Okay." And sometimes he swallowed. Sometimes something else gets in with them. I stared at him. "You sound insane." "I know." A soft knock came against the office door. 3 taps. Then my own voice whispered from outside. "Leon." I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Open the door." Another pause. Then, it hurts standing this long. Leon looked physically ill hearing that. The thing outside laughed softly. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet amusement. Then, footsteps slowly walked away. We stayed in that office for what felt like forever. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. Time stopped feeling normal. The police eventually radioed back, saying they were finally inside the building and moving floor to floor. Leon opened the office door slowly. The hallway outside was empty, but the carpet was wet. Long streaks of water led toward the elevators. The police searched the entire tower. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No person. No evidence anybody had ever been there except for the wet footprints in the elevator. One officer actually laughed a little when we explained everything, until he reviewed the security footage. Then he stopped laughing, because the footage showed exactly what Leon described. A tall figure appearing on 16th, standing motionless, then moving closer between camera refreshes without ever visibly walking. And the final frame before the camera cut out showed the figure directly in front of the lobby camera, smiling, face pressed against the lens. I quit 3 days later. Leon quit the same night. Neither of us ever went back. A month after that, I got curious and searched online for incidents tied to the building. Turns out there had been multiple reports over the years from overnight workers. Maintenance guys, security guards, cleaning crews, mostly small things. Motion alerts, strange figures on cameras, voices in empty floors. But one report stood out. 8 years earlier, a security guard disappeared during an overnight shift. No sign of him was ever found. The last thing visible on camera before the feed cut out was him standing in the lobby, staring toward the elevators, smiling at someone off camera.